Hey guys, tonight we're heading way back to the bustling, bath-splashed, olive-oiled world of ancient Rome, where chariots rattle over cobbled streets and everyone's wearing sandals without socks because, well, they haven't been invented yet. You're standing in a narrow insula apartment rubbing your eyes as the sun creeps in over the Tiber. And what's the first thing on your mind? Probably not brushing your teeth. But you're Roman now, so surprised that's exactly what you're about to do. Now, before we dive into crushed mouse brains and strange herbal brews, let's take a second to appreciate that ancient Romans did, in fact, care about their teeth. Maybe not in the way your dentist would approve of, but they weren't just out here chewing garum and letting nature take its decaying course. That said, you probably won't survive this routine without gagging at least once. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere interesting, I'd love to know. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the cold mosaic floor of your Roman apartment. No slippers. Just dust and ambition. Somewhere below, your neighbor is already yelling at a chicken. You find your little ceramic hygiene pot and dip 2 fingers inside. The contents: a powdery mix of charcoal, crushed bones, and ashes from burnt rosemary. You smear it on your teeth using your index finger. That's your toothbrush today. No plastic, no bristles. Just skin soot and optimism. If you're wealthy or pretending to be, you might use a frayed stick called a dentiscalpium. It's basically a fancy twig. Maybe you chew the end until it flares into soft fibers, then drag that splintered end across your molars like you're flossing with firewood. The taste charred and vaguely herbal, like brushing with a campfire that once hosted a sage leaf. But you keep at it because in Rome, hygiene isn't just personal, it's performative. Clean teeth signal status, discipline, and that oh-so-coveted Roman virtue gravitas. Historians still argue whether dental hygiene was truly widespread or mostly aspirational, confined to the elite with time and coin to burn. What's more certain is this: if you're a free citizen with ambition, bad breath isn't just unpleasant, it's undignified. You rinse with vinegar. Yes, vinegar. Diluted if you're lucky. Straight if you're a purist. The sting isn't subtle. Your gums feel like they're protesting quietly but stoically, very Roman of them. Some wealthier Romans add salt or crushed herbs to their mouth rinse, believing it can whiten teeth, freshen breath, and ward off everything from plaque to envy. You try not to swallow it, but sometimes you do, and that's okay. In fact, Pliny the Elder, Rome's walking encyclopedia of everything half-true, once recommended swallowing vinegar and ash as a breath freshener. It didn't catch on. Some mornings you wake up and wonder if all of this effort actually does anything. But then you see your neighbor Publius. He skipped the charcoal this week and he's got breath like a fish sauce barrel in August. Suddenly, the ash doesn't seem so bad. And if you're wondering about toothpaste, yes, they had that too. Of a sort. It was usually a paste made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and on occasion powdered mouse brains. Don't worry, we're saving that for later. For now, the important thing is this: Rome might not have invented brushing your teeth, but they definitely turned it into a daily art form, especially for those who wanted to be seen as civilized. You finish your routine. Wipe your fingers on the linen scrap. Toss the used ash out the window because hygiene, but make it chaotic. And just as you're heading to the atrium, you catch your reflection in the polished bronze mirror. Your teeth, grayish, slightly gritty, but clean. And for now, that's more than enough. Your teeth might be tingling slightly from that vinegar rinse, but congratulations, you're now ready to join the ambitious ranks of Roman society. And here's the thing: your oral hygiene routine wasn't just for hygiene. It was also, like most things in Rome, a performance. You step out into this morning light and already the forum is bustling. Togas billow, sandals slap, fruit vendors yell aggressively about figs. And amid all this chaos, one thing becomes increasingly clear: A white smile is more than just clean. It's a kind of status symbol. Because in ancient Rome, your mouth was a marker of your class. Clean, even-toned teeth that suggested refinement. Self-discipline, a life without too many raw onions or hastily chomped crusts in alleyways. If you had teeth that looked healthy and bright, people assumed you had leisure time servants, maybe even a philosopher on retainer. On the other hand, if you had yellow teeth, or worse if you were missing a few, well, people might assume you're a laborer, or a soldier, or gasp a foreigner. This is where things get interesting. Because the Romans didn't just want clean teeth, they wanted white teeth, shiny teeth, pearly teeth that reflected sunlight like a marble statue grinning at the gods. So you might dabble in a little something extra. Enter urea-based mouthwash. That's right. Ancient Roman dental circles believed urine, particularly from people in faraway provinces like Hispania, was excellent for whitening teeth. Fresh or fermented. They called it lant, and it was considered premium if imported. You could buy it in the market right next to jars of garum and questionable olives. It worked too, or so they claimed. The ammonia content probably did help remove surface stains, even if it made your friend stand a few feet farther away while you were talking. Historians still argue whether the average Roman truly used urine as part of their dental routine, or if this was more common among performers, sex workers, and the ultra-fashion-conscious elite. But there's enough written commentary to suggest that yes, at least some people thought golden rinse meant golden teeth. You think about this as you stroll past a bathhouse where two men are loudly debating whether bad breath is a character flaw or just a side effect of poor upbringing. One of them gestures dramatically with a toothbrush twig. The other points to his teeth and says, "See vinegar and mint." Like kissing a garden. You hurry past before they invite you to participate. Let's just say personal space wasn't invented yet. You stop by a vendor selling tooth powders. They come in small ceramic pots with hand-painted labels. Some smell of sage, others of myrrh. One claims to contain ground-up pearls from the Red Sea. You open the lid, sniff, and recoil. Mouse brain, the vendor says proudly. Imported. For that deep cleanse. You pretend to be impressed, and you move on. But as you meander through the market, it strikes you how much teeth are tied to everything here: status, cleanliness, conversation, even legal contracts. In fact, it's not uncommon for testimonies in court to mention whether a witness spoke clearly and without foul breath. Imagine being dismissed because your mouth smelled of anchovies and defeat. You reach a small fountain and rinse your mouth again, just water this time. A little ritual, a palate cleanser for the day ahead. And as you watch the sunlight bounce off a passing chariot's bronze rim, you grin. Your teeth might not be sparkling, but they're yours. And they've survived vinegar ash, maybe a whisper of mouse brain, and they're still here. Which in Rome is an achievement in itself. You duck into a shaded side street to escape the heat, or maybe to escape the thought that someone somewhere is gargling with Spanish urine in pursuit of social clout. But you're not out of the woods yet, dentally speaking, because today's real star is making its entrance. The mouse. Specifically the crushed brains of one. Yes, you heard that right. Tonight you learn why some ancient Romans thought that rodent gray matter was the secret to a perfect smile. You're probably hoping this was a one-off fringe practice, like that one uncle who eats pickled eggs and insists it's medicinal. But no. Mouse brain toothpaste was recommended by respected Roman thinkers, well-respected-ish, and it stuck around long enough to end up in multiple medical treatises and household scrolls. It all begins with Pliny the Elder, Rome's favorite enthusiast of the bizarre. He wrote volumes on everything from lunar hair growth to lizard-based anxiety cures so naturally, he had thoughts about dental hygiene, and those thoughts included mice. You find a copy of his Natural History in a dusty corner of a scholar's domus. You're just flipping pages looking for a recipe for cucumber wine when you stumble upon this gem. To whiten the teeth and strengthen the gums, take the brains of mice, crush them with powdered mint, and apply daily with the finger. It's said so casually as if he were listing ingredients for a stew. But no, he means it. as a toothpaste. You try not to imagine the collection process. Mouse caught, brain extracted, mint pulverized, all of it mashed into a gritty damp paste and rubbed across your dental landscape with zero shame. You wonder not for the first time whether hygiene in Rome was more about courage than cleanliness. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of mouse brains was truly rooted in medicinal belief. Some suggest it was based on sympathetic magic, where the tiny, agile nature of a mouse was believed to scurry away disease. Others argue it's a simple misunderstanding of pest control gone medicinal. Whatever the origin, this wasn't a joke. People really tried it. You pass a vendor on the street hawking various hygiene items. One of his jars has a rat stamped on the lid. You pause. He winks. This one's premium, 3 brains per batch. You back away slowly. In reality, only the wealthier households could afford even the idea of medical-grade rodents. For common folks, a simple vinegar rinse and a stick of thyme would have to do. But among elite circles, especially those concerned with appearances, social standing, or tooth-related omens, it caught on. Because in Rome, science and superstition shared a toothbrush. You reach a quiet garden and settle onto a stone bench watching a slave boy trim herbs. Somewhere nearby, a noblewoman is having her teeth painted with honey and alum and astringent meant to harden enamel and brighten color. The mixture stings like betrayal, but she's used to it. Beauty hurts, even in the mouth. And the mouse brain, well, that's just part of the game. You'd think people would be turned off by the thought. But consider the alternatives. No toothpaste, no dental care, and a life of painful extractions and public shame over breath that could kill a gladiator. Suddenly, a smear of rodent puree seems survivable. Besides, there's mint in it. That's basically refreshing. You lean back watching the garden sway in the heat. You wonder how many smiles in Roman portraiture were hiding crushed creatures behind the scenes. Probably more than you'd expect. And just as you begin to drift into an oddly serene acceptance of the whole situation, a passing servant offers you a pinch of their family's tooth powder. You take a whiff, mint, ash, maybe thyme. No mouse. You thank the gods. And your nose. You wake to the sound of sandals slapping against stone. Somewhere nearby, someone's already shouting about figs. Morning in Rome doesn't so much begin as ambush you loudly, fragrantly, and with zero respect for snoozing. But you're used to it now. You swing your legs over the edge of your straw-filled mattress and stretch bones creaking in a way that feels satisfyingly Roman. You're in a modest upper-floor room in a multi-family insula, a kind of ancient apartment building, where your ceiling is someone else's floor and the walls are thin enough to learn your neighbor's deepest fears. Step 1 of your Roman morning. No coffee, no warm shower, no gentle scroll through social media. You head straight for your chamber pot. Okay, maybe not the glamour you expected, but remember, you're living in a world where plumbing is a luxury, and most things smell faintly of goat. You do your business, splash a little water from the communal jug to wash your hands and brace for the day. Next, you reach for your morning hygiene kit. A small linen pouch filled with your daily essentials. A sprig of rosemary, a worn piece of cloth, a bit of charcoal powder wrapped in wax paper. And if you're fancy, a fragment of dental pick made from bronze or sharpened bone. You wet your fingers with vinegar, today's version of antiseptic, and dip them into the charcoal powder. It coats your fingertips in a fine gray-black grit. You press it to your teeth, scrubbing in slow, thoughtful circles. The powder tastes earthy, acrid, vaguely like burnt toast with delusions of grandeur. Historians still argue whether vinegar and charcoal actually improved dental health or merely gave users the illusion of cleanliness. Regardless, it was routine, reliable, predictable. And in a chaotic world of emperors being assassinated and gladiators tripping on their sandals, predictability is a comfort. You rinse with a handful of cool water from the amphora. It tastes slightly metallic and probably has a few microscopic mosquito eggs in it, but again, comfort. Once clean-ish, you tie on your tunic, rewrap your belt, and consider breakfast. Nothing heavy. Romans believed in light morning fare, maybe some bread, a smear of cheese, and a few olives. If you're lucky, someone down the street is boiling lentils, and the aroma drifts through your open shutters. You take a bite of bread and realize with some despair that you forgot to inspect it for pebbles. Roman flour isn't sifted like modern stuff. That faint crunch, that stone dust. You whisper a quiet prayer for your molars. By now, the streets are filling. You make your way downstairs, dodging stray cats, children with sticky fig hands, and one old woman who absolutely will slap you with a broom if you walk too loudly. Outside, the world unfolds in smells, fish sauce, warm bread, sweat dust, and something that's either basil or fermented socks. You pass a friend who greets you with a dazzling, suspiciously clean smile. You squint. There's a shimmer there. Did they polish their teeth with bronze again? You shake your head. Too flashy. Your own teeth may not sparkle, but they're authentic. Gritty. Earned. Besides, you can always claim your shade of enamel is earth-toned, very in vogue with the toga crowd. You pass a bathhouse, steam rising like the breath of sleepy gods, and catch a glimpse of a barber preparing his tools. He's boiling water over a brazier and polishing a pair of gleaming tweezers. Somewhere in that toolkit is a dental scraper, probably used with more enthusiasm than precision. We'll get to barbers later. For now, you take in the pace of a Roman morning. Shouts echo off marble columns. Doves flap from roof to roof, looking mildly annoyed to be awake. A courier sprints past with scrolls clutched under one arm, muttering curses about his sandal strap. It's chaotic, alive. And through it all, people smile wide, close-lipped, missing a tooth, gold-capped, or just freshly mouse-brained. Because that's Rome, messy, vain, resourceful, and sometimes weirdly obsessed with dental care. As the sun climbs higher and the first glint of sweat gathers at your temple, you duck into the shadow of a colonnade and take a moment. Your teeth feel clean enough. Your breath, well, it smells like vinegar and ash, but that's practically minty by Roman standards. And somehow, despite the noise and the oddity, and the lingering suspicion that your neighbor's mouse supply is dwindling, for a reason you feel ready for the day. You make your way toward the forum, weaving past overloaded carts and street philosophers who are already arguing about ethics before breakfast. The scent of boiling lentils mingles with smoke and citrus peels. It's still early, but the city is alive, buzzing, chattering, occasionally yelling about turnips. And through it all, something lingers in the air besides dust and drama. Breath. Roman breath, to be precise. Because if there was one thing people in ancient Rome worried about, aside from tax collectors and lions, it was bad breath. Or as they'd call it, factor oris, the stink of the mouth. And let's be honest, in a world of garlic-heavy diets, fish sauce smoothies, and public toilets that doubled as party spots, factor oris was a constant threat. You duck into a small apothecary wedged between two wine stalls. Inside, the shelves are packed with ceramic jars, bundles of dried herbs, and a very dusty tortoiseshell that might be decorative or an ingredient. You don't ask. The apothecary greets you with a nod and a waft of camphor. Looking for something for the breath, are we? You admit reluctantly that yes, your morning lentil snack has you feeling less than fresh. He offers you a pinch of powder. You recognize the ingredients: crushed anise, rosemary, mint, and a touch of frankincense. There's also something that smells suspiciously like goat milk, maybe even goat bile. You try it anyway. Roll it around your tongue. It tastes like a monastery on fire, but your breath does feel crisper afterward. Historians still argue whether Roman breath fresheners were truly effective or more like ritualized mints, performative and polite. But either way, the concern was real. Romans judged people harshly on their oral aroma. There's even a passage in Juvenal's satires about a wealthy woman whose kisses were feared across dinner parties because she never rinsed after garum. Picture someone puckering up after guzzling fermented fish sauce, and you'll understand the trauma. So people got creative. Some chewed myrtle leaves, others sucked on cinnamon bark or cloves imported at great expense from faraway lands. Wealthy citizens might even rinse with saffron water, believing it perfumed the mouth and impressed dinner guests. It probably did. It also made their spit bright yellow. You walk past a woman dipping a linen cloth into a bowl of warm vinegar. She wrings it out and gently dabs her gums. This was a common morning ritual thought to tighten the tissues and cool the breath. It also gave the added bonus of looking slightly terrifying. Further down, a senator's aide is fanning open a scroll detailing his master's daily regimen. It includes a rinse of honey and pepper water, 2 chews of parsley, and most perplexingly, a single drop of donkey milk under the tongue for sweetness. You're not sure whether the sweetness is metaphorical or just wishful thinking. Of course, not everyone could afford such luxuries. For many, Romans' good breath came down to simple rules. Don't eat too much garlic, swish some wine after meals, and hope your neighbors are too polite to say anything. But there's always one person who takes things too far. You hear the familiar clatter of Lucius, an amateur philosopher and part-time breath-freshening evangelist. He carries a pouch of dried herbs on his belt and offers unsolicited critiques like, "Your mouth smells of missed opportunities." Today, he offers you a pebble soaked in rosemary oil. "Chew it," he says. "It awakens the tongue." You chew it. Your tongue awakens and immediately wishes it hadn't. You thank him with a polite nod and a small lie. The thing is, Roman breath rituals weren't just about health, they were about image. You could be missing half your toga, but if your mouth smelled of basil and confidence, you still had a chance. You walk past a marble fountain where a few young men are rinsing their mouths laughing as they spit in synchronized fashion. One slips curses and lands in a splash. His friend offers him a mint leaf in consolation. The city continues to swirl around you, an endless choreography of mouths opening and closing, whispering, shouting, selling, singing. And underneath it all, a low, minty undertone of fear, because in Rome, it wasn't your looks or your sandals that made the first impression. It was your breath. And yours, thanks to crushed herbs, vinegar, and sheer determination, now passes the test. At least until lunch. You drift away from the fountain and its mint-scented misadventures, following the breeze toward a quieter alley framed by ivy-covered walls. The streets narrow here and the chaos softens into the gentle rhythms of daily maintenance. Scrubbing, sweeping, gossiping. Somewhere nearby, someone is rehearsing a flute melody badly. And then you catch sight of a tiny shrine half hidden behind a butcher's stall, flanked by drying garlic and an anxious-looking chicken. It's dedicated to a god you've never heard of. A chipped inscription reads, "To Endovelicus, who eases the ache of bone and root." You blink. Bone and root. That's right, a dental god. You might have heard of Asclepius, god of medicine. He gets the temples and the fancy carvings. But tooth pain. Tooth pain lives in the shadows, in the back alleys, in the nervous offerings of those whose molars throb like tiny traitors. And Romans, being Romans, had no shortage of divine petitions for such things. You kneel briefly, part out of reverence, part out of curiosity. The shrine holds offerings, a sprig of sage, a copper coin, and what appears to be a carved wooden tooth. There's even a smear of honey on the ledge, a sweet gesture to appease whatever spirit might be listening. Historians still argue whether these minor deities were true gods or regional folk inventions adopted into Roman practice, like stray cats into a villa. Either way, they served a purpose, because when your tooth hurts and the nearest physician is out of leeches, you pray hard. You rise and continue walking, your fingers brushing the linen pouch in your tunic. You brought a dried poppy pod just in case. Not to worship with, but to chew. Poppy was known to dull pain or at least distract from it long enough to finish your business. Around the corner, you find a small crowd gathered around a medicus dentarius, a kind of proto-dentist. He's setting up shop with alarming confidence. His tools are laid out on a cloth bronze probes, long tweezers, a chisel that looks more appropriate for pottery than molars. Next to him sits a young man, jaw clenched, eyes watering. The crowd leans in. You lean back. Tooth extractions in Rome weren't done under anesthesia, unless you count strong wine, which most did. Sometimes the patient bit down on a piece of leather, sometimes on a stick, sometimes on their pride. The dentist chants something. It's unclear if it's a medical incantation or just a motivational speech. He grabs the forceps. The crowd winces. The patient does too. Moments later, the tooth is out, bloody cracked and still steaming faintly in the morning sun. The dentist holds it up like a prize. Someone applauds. You pretend not to feel slightly faint. Of course, not all tooth-related problems ended in public extraction. Many Romans sought relief through amulets, tiny protective charms hung around the neck or wrist, often inscribed with symbols or prayers. One popular design was a small gold plate, etched with the phrase, "O Dontor be still." Others whispered curses at the moon, buried teeth in crossroads, or left small wax effigies at healing temples. Still others visited wise women in the countryside who brewed teas of nettle and rue and told stories of fauns who traded molars for dreams. It was a wide world of superstition and syncretism, where medicine blurred with myth and teeth were both physical burdens and spiritual symbols. You reach into your pocket and feel the smooth stone your grandmother gave you. The tooth pebble polished by years of being clutched during jaw aches. You smile, remembering her voice, bite it when the pain comes. Not because it works, because it reminds you it will pass. You pass another tiny altar, this one dedicated to Mephisthes, goddess of noxious smells and underground vapors. Apparently, she gets quite a few offerings from people suffering bad breath and infected gums. You leave a thyme sprig on the altar just to be safe. As the sun shifts overhead and the street grows quiet again, you realize something. Even in a city of marble, an empire where armies march and philosophers argue, people still pause to worry about their teeth. Still pray, still offer, still hope. Because whether it's a toothache or an empire, everything starts to crumble at the root. You stroll on away from the scene of impromptu dentistry and the quietly steaming tooth still cradled in the medicus's tongs. The street hums with motion again. A child runs past carrying a loaf of bread nearly his size. A merchant yells at a goat. You, meanwhile, are thinking about toothpicks. Yes, toothpicks. Because for all their weird pastes and vinegary rinses, Romans were obsessed with picking their teeth. So much so that it wasn't just a hygienic habit, it was practically a personality trait. You reach into your belt pouch and pull out a slender bronze toothpick. It's been smoothed by years of use and honestly, it looks elegant. Functional, yes, but also kind of fashionable. In some circles, a good toothpick was as essential as your sandals or your seal ring. Some Romans even wore them on chains around their necks or tucked into their hair, ready to whip out after a particularly seedy fig, or a crunchy meal of barley and garum. It's the ancient equivalent of carrying floss in your wallet, only with more flair. You slip the toothpick between your molars and give a gentle scrape. A chunk of something comes loose. You don't ask what. Possibly mouse brain residue. Classy. Toothpicks weren't limited to the elite either. Even common folk had their versions, slivers of wood whittled bone bits of metal if they were lucky. In wealthier homes, they were carved from ivory or silver. One senator was famously mocked for using a gold toothpick. He claimed it prevented tarnishing. The poets claimed he had too much money and not enough friends. Historians still argue whether toothpicking was seen as refined or repulsive in polite Roman society. On one hand, it was a sign of attention to hygiene. On the other, doing it too enthusiastically, especially during a meal, could brand you as a rustic. Imagine sitting in a quiet dining room only to hear the rhythmic click-click of someone excavating their molars with what sounds like a tuning fork. Not ideal. And yet some Romans couldn't resist. One inscription on a bathroom wall in Ostia reads, "He picked his teeth more than he picked his friends." Ouch. You pass a wine shop where a group of young men are sitting on overturned crates, passing around a clay pot filled with figs. One of them pulls a toothpick from his toga fold and gives a contented sigh. Better out than in, he mutters, flicking the results into the street like it's an act of civic duty. You nod in silent agreement. You're beginning to appreciate the Roman obsession with their mouths, not just the breath, not just the color of their teeth, but the feeling. That tactile ritual of scraping, swishing, and spitting. It was as much about comfort as cleanliness. You reach a fountain and splash your face, swishing a bit of cool water through your cheeks. Then, as if by instinct, you reach back for your toothpick. Not because your teeth are dirty, but because it feels right. Something to do while you think. while you plan. While you pretend you're not avoiding that one neighbor who wants to sell you lion-based mouthwash. Spoiler, it's not made from lions. It's made for lions. The sun climbs higher and your shadow shrinks beneath you. You find yourself in the shade of a colonnade where an elderly man is offering to sharpen people's toothpicks for 2 sesterces. His hands are steady, his tools precise, and his expression one of deep, unwavering judgment. You hand him yours. He takes it, nods, and begins honing it with a flat piece of pumice. While he works, he tells you about the different styles of toothpick users. The jabbers, he says, demonstrating with a twitch. The twirlers. The deep divers, and then the drama queens who pull out a full mirror and act like they're performing surgery. You laugh quietly, because he's definitely describing someone you know. He finishes with a flick and hands your pick back clean, gleaming, and possibly sharper than a gladiator's sword. You thank him, tuck it into your belt, and walk on. There's something deeply Roman about all of this. Not just the gadgets and powders and elaborate breath rituals, but the way a culture so obsessed with public image still made time for such a private act. Cleaning your teeth, maintaining your mouth. It wasn't about vanity, not entirely. It was about order. The kind you could control even when the world empire's gods' dinner parties spun wildly around you. So you keep walking, toothpick tucked away, mouth oddly content, and a tiny part of you wondering if someday someone will write poems. You step out of the colonnade just as a gust of hot wind carries the scent of roasted onions and something vaguely medicinal, probably one of the nearby bathhouses experimenting with eucalyptus and wishful thinking. You pull your tunic tighter, not from cold but out of habit, the way Romans do when they're about to engage in something that requires mental fortitude. Because now you're heading toward the barber's stall. Not the modern kind with playlists and cucumber water. No, this is the Roman kind. Equal parts grooming salon, medical clinic, and impromptu comedy club. The barbers' tonsors of ancient Rome didn't just cut hair and trim beards, they were also the go-to folks for pulling teeth, popping boils, and offering unsolicited relationship advice. You arrive just in time to see a man reclined awkwardly on a wooden stool, mouth open, eyes wide, gripping a chair leg like it's a lifeline. The tonsor leans over him with the confident air of someone who's performed this procedure exactly twice and read about it once. In his hand, a pair of iron pliers. You wince. The patient winces harder, the crowd loving it. Yes, this was a public affair. Having a tooth pulled by your local barber wasn't a quiet appointment. It was community entertainment. Kids watched old ladies gossiped, and someone always tried to sell snacks nearby. But you're here to observe, not participate. At least that's the plan. You glance at the barber's tool set. It's an impressive and slightly terrifying collection: scrapers, tweezers, razors, hooks, and something that looks like it could double as a door hinge. All gleaming with a suspicious mix of oil and ambition. One tool in particular catches your eye, a long-handled spoon-like instrument used to scrape tartar from teeth, or, as the barber calls it, the breathstone. He claims it brings back your smile of Venus. You suspect it also brings back trauma. Historians still argue whether barbers had formal dental training or simply learned on the job. Most likely it was a bit of both, some training, some instinct, and a whole lot of trial and error. Heavy on the error. The man on the stool finally lets out a yelp loud enough to make pigeons flee from nearby roofs. The barber yanks the tooth free with a triumphant grunt and holds it up to the crowd like he's just pulled Excalibur from a molar. Blood drips onto his sandals. You consider rethinking lunch. Still, people line up. Because if you couldn't afford a medicus dentarius, the barber was your best bet. They charged less, worked fast, and at the very least knew how to distract you with a well-timed joke about fish sauce. You watch as the next patient settles into the seat, clutching a small wax tablet on which he's written his last will and testament. Just in case. The barber grins and offers him a cup of watered-down wine. "1 swig for courage," he says. "2 if you want to remember none of this." You move toward the edge of the crowd and glance at a side table where toothpicks and grooming oils are for sale. One jar is labeled for heroic gums and smells strongly of time and fear. You try a dab on your finger. it tingles. Possibly from the herbs. Possibly from the lead some barbers mixed into their ointments to give them a whitening effect. Because yes, the same Romans who feared tooth pain also willingly rubbed powdered lead on their gums if it made them look good at dinner. You'd think they'd learn, but no. Lead was everywhere in makeup and wine jugs and even in mouth products. It was fashionable and deadly. A 2-for-1 deal no one asked for. You hear a shout behind you the second patient's tooth is out. The crowd claps again. Someone offers him a bit of mint to chew. Another offers him a date to celebrate survival. You think about how Romans viewed pain not as something to avoid, but something to endure with style, like gladiators of the jaw. And these barbers, for all their roughness, were part of the oral ecosystem. Their stalls were often social hubs, places where you could get your beard trimmed, your teeth scraped, your love life analyzed, and your self-esteem obliterated all before lunch. You slip away before anyone asks if you're next. As you walk on, the sounds of the barber's jokes and clattering tools fade into the distance. Your tongue drifts instinctively to your own teeth, counting them like old coins. Still there, still solid. You say a quick thanks to whatever gods govern dental survival, and make a silent vow to avoid barbershops for at least a week. You meander away from the barber's stall with its blood-spattered tiles and oddly upbeat mood, your feet finding quieter cobblestones that slope gently toward the river. You're in search of something gentler, something less forceful than iron pliers and powdered lead. So naturally you find yourself in front of a perfumer's stall. Yes, perfume. Because in ancient Rome, the line between smelling good and smelling healthy was surprisingly blurry, and nowhere was that more true than when it came to oral hygiene. Romans didn't just perfume their necks and robes, they perfumed their mouths. A young woman behind the counter waves you over. Her hands are stained from the lavender she's been crushing into a small clay bowl. She's mixing it with a splash of vinegar, a little honey, and something bitter, myrrh maybe. Or possibly a touch of crushed resin from a tree that no longer exists. This is for the tongue, she says. You blink. The tongue, she nods solemnly. A fragrant tongue makes sweet speech. You're not sure if that's a proverb or a sales pitch, but either way, she hands you a thin reed brush and gestures toward the bowl. You dip the brush and gently sweep it across your tongue. It's surprising. Bitter sharp, slightly floral, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely not what you'd expect from something with honey in it. Your tongue tingles like it's waking up from a nap it didn't agree to. This, it turns out, was a legitimate Roman practice. Perfumed rinses, mouth paints, and tongue scrubs were all part of the elite hygiene routine. It wasn't just about function, it was about flair. Kissing someone whose breath smelled like frankincense was a status symbol, like driving a chariot with gold hubcaps. Historians still argue whether these oral perfumes were medically useful or simply cosmetic. Some contained antibacterial herbs, others were basically spiced syrup. But regardless of effectiveness, the goal was clear: be unforgettable. Olfactorily, you purchase a small vial of the mixture and tuck it into your pouch. The label reads for declarations of love or law. Nice to know it's versatile. As you walk on, you start noticing how common scent is in this city of stones and sweat. You pass a baker dusting cloves onto a loaf, a priest burning bay leaves at a street altar, a slave boy scattering mint into the gutters to fight the stench of the tannery. The city smells alive. And amid it all, the Roman mouth becomes not just a place for eating or yelling at bad actors, it's a stage. A scented stage, no less. You remember reading that some noble women would chew aromatic gum made from mastic, a resin from Mediterranean trees. It freshened the breath and cleaned the teeth, all while looking ever so slightly like you were chewing on tree bark. Which you were, but it was luxurious tree bark. Even some emperors were known for their oral aroma. Legend says Nero insisted on cinnamon oil rinses after every meal. Not for cleanliness, but so that people would remember his words. A bit dramatic, sure, but this is Rome. Everything is dramatic, even your gums. A man in a purple-edged toga passes you and gives a courteous nod. The air as he passes smells faintly of cardamom and power. you catch yourself smiling. Not because he's attractive, but because he clearly flosses with imported herbs. You continue along the Tiber where the breeze is cooler and the crowds are thinner. A group of bathers laugh on the riverbank, scrubbing their teeth with rough linen and salt water. You join them rinsing your mouth with river water after checking carefully for dead eels. The salt stings your gums a bit, but also feels honest, basic, effective, timeless. It reminds you that for all the perfumes and powders and poetic tongue scrubs, some Romans still relied on salt twigs and stubbornness, and maybe they were onto something. You dry your face and stretch the sun warming your shoulders. Your teeth feel clean enough. Your tongue still hums with lavender. And your breath. Well, you wouldn't offend a senator. Probably. You decide that's a win. As you head back toward the city's heart-passing temples and gossiping vendors, you realize something quietly delightful. In a city where everything is loud, your mouth can still speak softly thanks to honey herbs and a touch of truly questionable science. You wander back through the city guided by the sun's lazy tilt and the faint scent of baked bricks. Your mouth feels surprisingly well-traveled, like it's just returned from a spa run by philosophers and mildly intoxicated perfumers. But as you round the corner past a mural of Bacchus riding a dolphin as one does, you come across something unusual. A line. Not for wine, not for bread, but for ashes. More specifically, a small stalls where a solemn man in a green tunic is selling little clay jars labeled tooth ash, the ancient Roman version of toothpaste. You join the queue partly out of curiosity, partly because the jar has a goat drawn on it. A goat with sparkling teeth. When it's your turn, the man gestures to a small dish and offers you a pinch of pale gray powder. Crushed bones, burnt shells, bit of mint. You raise an eyebrow. And mouse brain, he adds proudly. There it is. You dip a dampened finger in and press the powder gently against your teeth. The texture is gritty, chalky at first, then oddly creamy, like someone tried to turn a sand dune into yogurt. And yes, it tastes exactly like something that was once part of a mouse. You try not to gag, but here's the thing, Romans genuinely believed in this. Their tooth ash was often made from charred animal bones, powdered pumice, and occasionally things like crushed oyster shells or even burnt deer antlers. Anything that scraped. Because to them, cleanliness was directly tied to abrasion. If it hurt a little, it must be working. Historians still argue whether these abrasives helped or harmed more. On one hand, they removed plaque. On the other, they probably took a little tooth enamel with them every time. But hey, nothing says clean like a little bit of erosion. You ask the man if he makes custom blends. He brightens instantly. Want something with more pepper, less mint, bit of fennel? I've even got one with crushed emerald, sparkles. You politely decline the gemstone version. Romans had a thing for adding powdered minerals to their hygiene products, especially the rich ones. There's a rumor that Cleopatra used a toothpaste containing pearls. Because of course she did. You walk away with a small jar tucked under your arm and a mouth that now tastes faintly of barbecue and regret. You pass a few teenagers daring each other to try the extra coarse version. One does. His reaction is exactly what you'd expect from someone who just sandpapered his gums. But this wasn't a joke to Romans. They cared about their teeth, not just for health but for status. White gleaming teeth were a sign of virtue, discipline, and wealth. Discolored or crooked teeth, signs of poor habits, poor diet, or worse, barbarism. In fact, a few wealthy Romans hired slave tooth polishers, people whose job it was to scrub their master's teeth every morning with chalk paste and linen cloths. You imagine waking up stretching and immediately having someone scrape your molars while reciting poetry. That's either luxury or nightmare, depending on how you feel about mornings. You stop near a shaded portico where a few elders are discussing the latest Senate scandals. One of them interrupts the political rant to loudly swish with a mouthful of what smells like warm vinegar and rose petals. He spits it onto the marble with such gusto it echoes. Rinse with anger, he says to no one in particular. You nod. Noted. Roman oral care wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was ritualistic. It was performative. and sometimes a little unhinged. You pass a fresco that shows a goddess, possibly Hygiene, holding a golden comb in one hand and a strange spoon-like instrument in the other. A tooth scraper, maybe, or a symbol of purity, or both. You wonder how many Romans looked at that image and thought, yes, that's who I want to impress with my molars. You find a quiet bench near a fig vendor, pop a few dried fruits into your mouth, and immediately regret it. The seeds wedge themselves between your back teeth like tiny saboteurs. You reach for your bronze toothpick. You scrape gently, savoring the absurdity. Because here you are, miles from the barber breath tinged with goat mint enamel. Lightly shaved molars, fig-free, and feeling oddly triumphant. The Romans were wild, but you're clean. And somewhere, some tiny household god of mouth care is quietly clapping. The sun drifts lazily across the sky, and your legs carry you toward the outskirts of the forum where merchants peddle stranger wares and the gossip gets juicier. A small boy yells about a two-headed chicken born under Jupiter's statue. A woman sells blessed socks that allegedly prevent ankle sprains, and nestled between them is a lean man in dusty robes with a sign that simply reads, "Teeth lost, I can help." You pause. He looks up and grins a perfect, dazzling smile that feels suspiciously artificial. You inch closer. On the table before him are a variety of false teeth neatly arranged on scraps of cloth like jewelry. Some are carved from ivory, some from bone, and one allegedly contains human teeth repurposed from fallen gladiators. You pick it up. It's heavier than expected. Cool to the touch. The molars are slightly uneven, and one of them has a tiny chip that frankly makes it look more authentic. This one's popular with senators, the man says, for when they need to smile, not speak. You chuckle. Romans did indeed use dental prosthetics, though they weren't exactly like our modern dentures. Most were either cosmetic, to preserve appearance during speeches or social functions, or symbolic, used in burial rituals. Some were even worn over still existing teeth, more like decorative mouth armor than true replacements. Historians still argue whether these false teeth were meant to be functional or purely aesthetic. The truth, as usual, is probably both. If your job was to flatter emperors or woo clients at dinner parties, having an unbroken row of gleaming fake molars was just another kind of armor. You hand the gladiator model back, and the vendor shows you his newest invention, a partial tooth bridge held together with gold wire. He claims it's more comfortable than previous models. You imagine wearing it during a debate and slowly unraveling mid-sentence as the wire digs into your gum. You politely decline. As you walk on, you start to notice how many people around you are missing teeth. A street performer sings with a visible gap. A fishmonger whistles through an upper incisor void. Even a nearby priest appears to have filled his own dental absence with wax and prayer. And yet, no one seems embarrassed. Tooth loss was common in ancient Rome, thanks to grit-laced bread-acidic wine and dental care that walked a fine line between heroic and hazardous. But unlike modern cultures where a missing tooth might signal shame, Romans took it in stride. In fact, some inscriptions on tombstones proudly note the deceased's number of remaining teeth. One epitaph you recall reads, "Here lies Marcus who could still bite figs at 60. A legacy, apparently. As you meander into a quieter part of town, you stumble across a small workshop. Inside, a woman carves dental talismans from bone and coral. For the newly teethed, she says, pointing to a row of baby charms. And the newly toothless, she adds, gesturing to a much larger row. Some are shaped like dolphin symbols of protection. Others look like tiny jaws open in eternal grin. One features a carving of a satyr chasing a molar. You don't ask. She explains that people often wore these charms during dental transitions. Children teething, elders losing their final teeth. Soldiers returning home after an unfortunate duel with a shield. Keep your teeth close, she says, and your mouth spirits closer. You purchase a small amulet shaped like a canine and string it around your neck. It clinks gently against your collarbone. And just like that, you're part of the tradition. The day fades into its golden hour shadows stretching across the plaza. You sit on a low wall as a group of kids play a game that involves dried beans and very aggressive dental metaphors. One of them yells, "He bit the moon," and collapses and giggles. You can't help smiling. Your teeth are still intact. Your gums tingle faintly from all the brushing and powdering. Your mouth, while slightly confused, feels oddly revered. Because here in ancient Rome, the mouth isn't just where food enters or words escape. It's a battlefield, a theater, a shrine. And whether you're whispering secrets, shouting laws, or just trying not to swallow another fig seed, your teeth tell your story, even if one of them used to belong to a gladiator. The late afternoon turns the cobblestones gold, and a gentle breeze carries the scent of olives and baked clay as you pass through a narrow archway into a quieter quarter of the city. Here, the chaos of the forum melts into courtyards where laundry flaps gently like surrender flags, and cats judge you from sunlit walls. You're heading now not toward another stall or vendor, but toward a household shrine, a domestic temple to hygiene gods, and as it turns out, mouth care. You're welcomed into the modest home of a retired scribe named Lucius, who invites you to share a drink of diluted wine and a bit of honeyed cheese. As he pours, he gestures toward a small alcove near his dining area. There, nestled between clay figurines of Lares and Penates, the household gods sits something unexpected: a tooth. A single human tooth carefully mounted in a little bronze frame, flanked by sprigs of dried rosemary and a pebble carved with what looks like a smiling face. You blink. Lucius grins modestly, showing several proud gaps. "It's my daughter's first lost tooth," he explains. "We offered it to the spirits of health and the god of beginnings." That would be Janus, of course, the two-faced god of doorways, transitions, and time. Romans didn't exactly have a designated dental deity, but they often linked health rituals to gods like Janus Salus for general wellness and Hygeia, whose Greek lineage brought a kind of holistic vibe into Roman households. Historians still argue whether placing teeth at shrines was symbolic of health or merely a hopeful bribe to prevent toothaches. Some scholars think it was a form of sympathetic magic: give the gods your worst tooth, and they'll spare the rest. You sip your wine and examine the little tooth again. It's slightly chipped, possibly from an ill-fated prune. Lucius tells you that every member of his household, wife, children, slaves, follows a nightly ritual. Rinse with mint water. Rub teeth and gums with a soft cloth soaked in vinegar. Whisper a small prayer to the Penates. Keep what is strong. Take what is spoiled. You can't help but admire it. A whole family involved in keeping each other's mouths clean and spiritually defended. As you walk deeper into the neighborhood, you start to notice subtle traces of similar practices. Tiny tooth-shaped amulets nailed above doorways. Painted tiles near kitchen wells that show little figures brushing their teeth with twigs. One mosaic even has a tiny banner beneath it. A clean mouth brings clean fortune. You pause at a fountain, scooping a handful of water to rinse your mouth again, not out of necessity, but tradition. It feels good. Grounding. As though the simple act of swishing water is somehow both practical and reverent. At another home, you see a grandmother instructing a wide-eyed boy on the correct way to chew fennel seed after dinner. She holds his chin, inspects his molars like a general reviews soldiers, and nods approvingly. You smile and continue on, thinking how deeply this culture ties cleanliness to character. In Rome, a well-kept mouth wasn't just about health or beauty. It was moral. A man with clean breath was seen as self-disciplined. A woman with white teeth respectable. A child who spat after rinsing with vinegar. A future consul, probably. You reach a shaded courtyard where a group of elders sits in a half-circle playing a game that seems to involve dice, old stories, and extremely specific insults. One man gestures toward another and declares, "This one's breath could wake Pluto himself." Everyone laughs, including the accused, who immediately pulls out a sprig of sage and chews it smugly. You sit beside them, chewing a bit of mint someone hands you. They ask where you've been today. You say barbers, perfumers, ash vendors, and false tooth merchants. The oldest man nods sagely. "Ah, a full circuit." He points to a scar on his lip. Got this in a duel over a toothbrush. Everyone laughs again. You're not sure if he's kidding. That's part of the fun. A young boy with a chipped front tooth skips into the courtyard and begins chanting a rhyme. It's an old one, something about keeping mice away from your molars and never kissing anyone who smells like burnt fish paste. The elders hum along, you do too. And in that moment it clicks. Roman oral. Care wasn't just routines and tools and terrifying pastes, it was woven into their culture. Into their stories, their jokes, their family rituals. It was social hygiene as much as personal. You lean back on your elbows, staring up at the lazy swirl of laundry above and the glint of sun on terracotta rooftops. You've never thought about your teeth this much in your life, and oddly it feels comforting. Because sometimes when the empire is big and the gods are distant, all you can do is whisper a prayer, swish some vinegar, and try to keep your smile sharp. Evening begins to roll over the city like a silk canopy pulled slowly across the sky, the light turning bronze, then lavender, then dusky blue. You drift through Rome's narrow alleys, past shuttered stalls and flickering oil lamps drawn now not by trade or ritual, but by curiosity. Because you've heard a rumor that somewhere near the old aqueduct district, a certain physician not famous but oddly respected keeps a notebook filled with unusual dental theories. The kind that make people whisper. The kind that involve stars, phlegm, and possibly frogs. You find the door at the end of a quiet lane. It's marked only by a faded carving of a molar surrounded by flames, comforting. Inside it smells of bay leaves and warm ink. A tall, owl-eyed man greets you with a quill tucked behind one ear. He introduces himself as Gaius the Gummer, though whether that's a nickname or an official title remains unclear. He offers you a seat beside a wax tablet and starts talking before you can even ask a question. Teeth, he declares, are ruled by Mars. You nod slowly, unsure if you're being tested. Gums, he continues, definitely Saturn, very sluggish, very unpredictable. You glance at his notes. They're elaborate, charts that align mouth pain with lunar cycles. Diagrams of molars compared to temple columns. And a short essay titled Why Cows Never Get Cavities and What We Can Learn. Historians still argue whether these early attempts at dental astrology were common practice or just the quirk of a few overly ambitious thinkers. But what's certain is that some Roman physicians truly believed the body was ruled by celestial rhythms. And yes, that included your incisors. Gaius shows you a jar filled with what he calls star ash. It's burnt fig leaf, rosemary, and powdered horn. He insists it should only be applied during full moons and after sneezing. You nod solemnly because, at this point, you're emotionally invested. He opens a small chest to reveal a collection of animal teeth, each labeled with Roman numerals and brief notes. Wolf fang. Good for strength. Pig molar. Avoid during Mercury retrograde. Mouse incisor. Useful in children's teething charms, not adult salves unless desperate. You ask if he's ever used actual frog material. He hesitates, then leans closer. Once, just once, during a gum abscess. He explains that boiled frog skin when dried and ground with myrrh was said to draw out toxic heat from the gums. Whether it worked or simply distracted the patient by sheer horror remains unknown. You think back to the perfumer's tongue wash. This is several steps beyond. Still, Gaius isn't all madness. He's got smart observations too, like how diet affects tooth decay or how breath can predict fevers before other symptoms appear. Some of his notes even include early toothbrushing diagrams using bristled twigs bound with twine. It's surprisingly practical, like ancient IKEA for molars. He even demonstrates a gargling chant once prescribed by a priest-physician in Carthage. The words are nonsense syllables meant to scare bad spirits out of the throat. You try it. You both sound ridiculous. It's deeply bonding. Before you leave, Gaius insists you take a small scroll with you. It's a list of tooth-appropriate offerings for each weekday. Apparently, Tuesdays are best for mint and Fridays are sacred to anise seeds. You thank him. He bows. You step back out into the street, scroll tucked under your arm, brain humming with celestial dental trivia. As you walk, you pass a pair of young lovers tucked into an alcove sharing bites of honeyed figs. One of them pulls back, frowning. The other laughs and offers a stick of mastic gum. Mouth care even now, always just a heartbeat behind desire. You smile. Because even here in the twilight between scientific medicine and poetic madness, Romans took their teeth seriously. Whether it was through moon charts, boiled frogs, or mint prescribed by Mars, they refused to let something as mundane as a mouth be left to chance. And somehow that's oddly beautiful. You press your tongue to your teeth. Still intact. Still yours. For now. Night has taken full hold of Rome now. The sky, once brushed with bronze and lavender, has deepened into a thick velvet scattered with a few cautious stars, peeking through the city's soft smoke haze. Oil lamps flicker on every corner, casting long, sleepy shadows that sway with the breeze. The air smells like olive oil soot, and the last batch of pine knot torch is being sold to late-night bathers. Your feet carry you without urgency toward a more secluded neighborhood, one lined with grander homes, ivy-covered walls and windows glowing with candlelight. This clearly is where the wealthier citizens of Rome sleep, and as it turns out, also where they bleach their teeth. Yes, because the higher your status, the whiter your smile was expected to be, and while the poor might make do with chalk paste or burnt rosemary, the rich preferred something stronger. You pause outside a villa where a servant is airing out a towel that smells suspiciously like ammonia. The woman at the gate nods at your interest. My mistress is whitening her teeth. You raise a brow. She explains imported wool soaked in Spanish urine. 3 days. You nod back slowly, pretending not to gag. Because she's not joking. Roman elite tooth whitening treatments often involve urine, particularly from Spain, which was considered to be especially potent. It was soaked in wool, strained, and then used as a base for mouth rinses or applied directly to the teeth with cloth. The ammonia in the urine acted as a bleaching agent. Effective, maybe. Pleasant, absolutely not. Historians still argue whether the Spanish origin of the urine was simply a marketing gimmick like putting Swiss on a watch, or whether regional diets actually affected its chemical strength. Either way, it became a luxury item. Think of it as the Botox of its time, but a little warmer and much, much smellier. You step aside as a young nobleman exits the villa with a confident grin. His teeth gleam in the torchlight too white, honestly, like he'd eaten snow and refused to swallow. You resist the urge to sniff the air as he passes. Continuing on, you reflect on how beauty standards always demand a bit of absurdity. In Rome, this often meant combining science with superstition in gloriously questionable ways. At one home, you overhear a dinner guest bragging about a new recipe for breath-freshening lozenges made with charcoal, anise seed, and powdered rose petals. She claims they were recommended by her midwife, who also moonlights as a dream interpreter. Classic Rome. You decide to try one from a nearby market stall. It's oddly fizzy, like the ghost of licorice trying to do stand-up comedy on your tongue. Still, your breath feels cleaner, fresher. Slightly floral, slightly flammable. You find yourself back near the Tiber, where a few older men sit on benches beneath flickering lamplight, chewing slowly and contemplatively. One of them holds a clay mug and motions you over. He offers you a sip of something he calls the final rinse. You smell it cautiously. Vinegar, myrrh, mint, and something metallic. He grins. Silver scrapings. Very fashionable now. Apparently, microdoses of powdered metals were sometimes included in wealthy Romans' dental regimens. Silver for purity, gold for longevity, lead for the deeply unfortunate. You take a very, very small sip. Your mouth tingles, but not unpleasantly. The mint dances with the myrrh, the vinegar cuts through everything, and the silver is mostly just texture. Burns a little, he says, means it's working. You thank him and sit nearby watching the river glint beneath the moonlight. A breeze picks up. Somewhere a dog barks once and then goes silent. Probably saw something divine. Your mouth by now has undergone a full Roman transformation, scrubbed, perfumed, scraped, chanted, over possibly moon-aligned and gently bleached. It feels oddly ceremonial. Because that's what it was, really. A ceremony. To be Roman meant not just enduring pain or building empires, but managing one's breath, teeth, and tongue with a level of creativity and obsession that rivals modern influencers. As the city dozes, you find comfort in knowing that no matter how ridiculous the method-powdered mouse brains, star charts, or fermented wool, there was always intention, care, even love, for a clean mouth, and perhaps a cleaner soul. The city exhales as midnight curls in. Torches burn low, and shutters creak softly as homes seal themselves from the night's chill. You're alone now on the stone path near a crumbling aqueduct with only your footsteps and the gentle slap of your sandals for company. There's something sacred about this hour in Rome, not just for sleep, but for reflection. And as you stroll, you begin to notice the echoes of mouth care as memory. A faded mural on a garden wall shows a family gathered around a basin, children giggling as their father scrapes his teeth with a twig. It's painted in soft ochres, worn, but still readable. Above it is scrawled in nearly illegible Latin clean mouth, clear words. You wonder how many generations copied that same ritual. How many passed down the same tools, the same prayers, the same mourning. Vinegar rinses like family heirlooms. Because Romans weren't just obsessed with keeping teeth clean, they believed in what those teeth said. Words mattered here, and the mouth was the portal. A lawyer's sharp tongue could topple a senator. A lover's whisper could launch a dynasty. A general's shout could move 1,000 troops. So to keep the mouth clean was to keep it ready. Even Roman poets famously cranky often linked oral health to eloquence. One famously wrote, "A mouth sweet as honey must first spit the dirt." Whether metaphor or literal advice, it stuck. And when things went wrong, when the gums bled, the breath turned sour, or a molar cracked mid-oath, the remedies returned with sacred urgency. People turned to the gods, to doctors, to ash vendors, and frog boilers, and perfumers with a fondness for fennel. Historians still argue whether these elaborate routines were based more in fear or pride. Was it about surviving the grit of daily Roman bread, or about appearing respectable at the next feast? You sit now on a low stone bench facing a statue of Hygiene, a goddess of health. She's holding a snake coiled around a cup, but it's her mouth that captures you. Just barely parted, as if about to speak something sacred. Or whisper a dental tip. Someone's placed a fig and a sprig of mint at her feet. Offerings. You smile, because somewhere out there, another Roman's probably rinsing their teeth in goat's milk or whispering lunar chants over a toothbrush carved from plumwood. And it all makes sense now. To clean your teeth in Rome wasn't just hygiene. It was participation in the world, in the rituals, in the hopes that what you said tomorrow would be clearer, truer, softer. You trace your tongue along your teeth, still intact, just a little dusty from the evening air. You rise, brushing off your robe, and begin to make your way back through the sleeping city. The cobbles are quieter now, the cat's bolder. Somewhere a fountain bubbles lazily, as if it too has settled in for the night. You don't need a mirror, you don't need another mouth rinse. You've earned this stillness. Because now you understand. In a city of orators, lovers, gossipers, lawmakers, poets, gladiators, philosophers, and very confused frog collectors, one thing was always true: a clean mouth was a powerful thing. And you've walked that path, sipped the brews, chewed the twigs, dodged the weirder powders, and lived to smile about it. Soft footsteps echo behind you. Probably just a mouse. Hopefully not one whose brain you brushed with earlier. You laugh quietly to yourself. Rome sleeps, and so will you. Let yourself settle now. You've wandered dusty streets, met perfumers and powder sellers, rinsed with rose vinegar, under an amber sky, and even learned to appreciate the occasional goat-scented dental charm. Your teeth have been through a journey, and so has your mind. Take a breath. Let the cool night air of ancient Rome drift in cicadas whispering a torch. flickering gently against a column, the rustle of ivy on old stone. You feel the weight of that tiny bone amulet still hanging around your neck, shaped like a molar gifted by a woman who believed it could ward off misfortune and poor conversation. Maybe she was right. In the hush of midnight, with the gods yawning above and the city dreaming below, your body feels heavier in the best way. Not tired, anchored. Like the stone benches in the forum, warm from the day, waiting for another sunrise. The moonlight touches the rooftops, and somewhere far away, a rooster thinks it's morning. It isn't, not yet. You close your eyes. No ash tonight, no vinegar, no ancient lozenges or silver scrapings. Just silence, soft air, and the knowledge that even in a world of emperors and epic battles, someone cared enough to invent mint-flavored mouse brain paste just to make you smile a little brighter. Sleep well, friend. The gods of molars and mint are watching.